Okay, so Tiffany is here today. She is a very experienced knitter, and she created a beautiful Hap shawl and did a ton of preparation. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk to Tiffany about the project and how she got to the point of wanting to make this Hap shawl. So hello, Tiffany.
Hello.
So I guess what I wanted to talk about first was just your background in terms of your education and your training. And then also I would like to know a little bit more about your life as a knitter.
So my background is in history. I was a history teacher for high school for several years, so I really love history. But I left the teaching world and went into the corporate world, and I've been living in IT for many years now. And raising a family is where I met my husband and was at work. We had 2 children, gotten very involved in their education. Love reading, spending time with them within books. And I've reached this new point in my life that as they're getting older, wanting to figure out what else I want to do with my life. So I went to grad school. I'm in the middle of that now for a master's in information. And the hopes is to be able to be a librarian. And I'll be able to combine my love of history, books, children, and be able to go and share that love and passion with other children, hopefully, as I finish up that degree. I am an avid knitter. I've been knitting since I actually went for my first knitting lessons when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. And I just went up to the yarn store and sat there all day and asked them to teach me to knit. And I really have been knitting ever since. So I have had always something on the knitting needles consistently all the time. So I don't know anything other than that. It calms me. It's a form of meditation almost.
I can just see you that first day. You're just like determined you're going to get there, like spending the whole day there.
Yes. It's part of that nesting of being pregnant, I think, but definitely it really, with my son, it was quilting, but quilting you can't take with you. Knitting is something you can throw in your purse and carry with you. And I do that quite often. So we'll sit in waiting rooms, waiting for my daughter to come out of ballet. I sit in lines at the theme parks with my kids and I'm knitting as I'm waiting. So it's something that is more portable than quilting. So I think it really just stuck.
Yeah. So where did you take the Hap shawl? Was that something that you traveled with, or was that pretty much a home project?
Well, since we've been in the isolation quarantine period when I was really starting it was mostly done at home. So
yeah, that makes sense. All right. So I guess the biggest question I have is, what is a Hap shawl and how is that different from any other kind of shawl?
Well, a Hap shawl, actually is a verb that really means to cover or to wrap warmly. And it was very popular in the Shetland Isles. It's also happening shawl in the Shetland Isles. And it was a form of practical wear for those cold winters for the ladies to double up their shawls because it's a square shawl. It can be doubled up on the diagonal and covered either over the shoulders. You could also wear it over the head and around you. It kept you very warm. And it became quite popular between the mid to late 19th century.
Okay. So I know when you were talking about this before, but this project was a long time in the planning process. I think you had mentioned you had been to the Shetland Islands, and that kind of is what inspired this project. So can you kind of just take us through just the whole process from the initial idea to the final completed project?
So our family actually traveled to Scotland in 2015, which is where I fell in love with Scotland and everything about it. I actually have not been to the Shetland Isles, but it is a goal. We actually went from Edinburgh down and did a road trip based on books for children when we went over there previously. once I got over there and fell in love with Scotland, the decision now is to go back. I want to do the Highlands and the Shetland Isles because of my fascination with it. But because of that trip, it got me wanting to learn more about the area. And then, of course, knitting led me into the idea of the haps, interested in that. Also, I took a craftsy class on a Shetland shawl, which kind of inspired me to that. I wanted to learn more about it, find books regarding it. I love tracing things from its history forward and making it more modern. So that's where it's kind of started. But I live in Florida, and there are not very many yarn stores. The one yarn store that taught me how to knit closed several years ago, and can't get my hands on Shetland wool, which I felt like you're going to make a Shetland Hap shawl, you really need a Shetland wool.
Yeah, of course.
So I got, for my birthday, I was able to go to the New York Sheep and Wool Festival in October of last year for the first time. That's where I met you. And I went through different booths and kept touching yarns, but yours was actually one of the first booths I touched in the yarns. And I kept thinking about it the whole time I was there. I was like, I really just want to go back and buy some of that yarn. So I bought a skein, came home and knitted a hat with it. And I just love the way it all felt in my hands. I got to wear it when I went to South Carolina at Thanksgiving. And it was just a pleasure to work with. So I decided, okay, now I know the right source for my Hap shawl. So I think that 2020 was going to be the year that I was going to create the thing that I've been dreaming of for quite a while. So I contacted you, and you helped me pick a fleece for this particular project. One of the things that I was concerned about in the project is I've never worked with I've always worked with commercial yarns, never hand spun and never directly from a farm, and was wondering if I could get enough of the same color for the particular project. The cream amount here, I needed a little over 1,000 yards and wasn't sure, not knowing anything about shearing the sheep and how much wool is on a sheep, if I would be able to get enough of the same color to make it work. And you assured me we could, and picked out the right one. And we started with the cream, and then throughout the few months you helped me pick out the rest of my colors with the different sheeps here.
So can you take us through which color is which hue from our farm?
So we have the fawn color here, which is mirror reed, and it was a great gradient color. And so what I did is I ended up taking the darker of the fawn and making it a fifth color in this particular shawl. So I added it here and in the middle and then toward the end. We have the gray here, which is Eleanor. We have the blackish brown color, which is Baxter. We have the brown, which is O'Brien, which is also the same yarn that I used from the same sheep for my hat that I purchased back in October at the Sheep and Wool Festival. So pretty excited. I love the darker colors. So as I told you when we first started, I navigate toward the darker ones. I fell in love with the darker shades. So it actually turned out really pretty.
It is so beautiful. So you were saying that the main color traditionally is darker and then the decorative pieces are lighter. Is that what you said? But you decided to sort of flip that around?
Yeah, typically within a Hap shawl, you have a garter stitch up here in the square, and then the lace part is known as old shell lace pattern. And that typically goes from dark to light, back to dark, and then you have your decorative edging. And I did try that, but I wasn't feeling it. I don't know, it was a large contrast between the black and the fawn for me, and it didn't set as pleasing to the eye as I think this one does. So I went from gray to black and then to the brown. So I'm constantly knitting and then pulling things back out if I don't like it. Color work is one of those things that is a little scary to me sometimes. I typically work in solid colors, and I don't tend to I do a lot of color work. But I don't have any problems with frogging it, pulling it all back out and re-knitting it up. And so that's what we did. My son actually helped me. I have him look at it and go, what do you think? You know, how do you think it looks? What if I change this? And so between the two of us going back and forth, we ended up with this color format. So.
So I still have all those sheep in our flock, but none of them have been moved on. They're really wonderful, wonderful ewes. So I'm glad you're happy with the yarn that they gave you. So you talked about your son helping you with the making some color choices. Does he have an art background or anything, or is he interested in?
No, actually, my daughter is more of the art background.
Really?
So, yeah. But I always like to have the kids have their, give me some opinions and be a part of what I'm working on. I'm going to try to also be a part of whatever they're working on in some creative ways. And so getting his opinion on it, is a way of making it kind of a family project.
Yes. So who else was involved in this? There's an interesting story there.
Yeah. So my husband was involved. Traditionally with a Hap shawl in the Shetland Isles, they would have a frame that they would do their blocking on that would actually stretches it out. And I have my book here. I'll see if we can get it up there closer to see it. These is traditionally what is called a Hap stretcher that was used in the Isles. And after you finish knitting it, you wet block it and then put it out, and it allows it to stretch and dry so that it's in a nice, perfect square. I really wanted, again, traditionalists. I like the history. I found a tutorial on a website for Kate Davies, who also wrote the book of Haps, and gave a tutorial on how to do it. So kind of took it to my husband and said, can we make this? And I had to reassure him that I would use it more than once for all the effort that we were going to have to do. But he helped me build it. And I absolutely love it. It was beautiful to put it out in the frame and sit it out in the sunshine. And I just felt like I was reliving some history.
Yeah.
Kind of channeling that old spirit.
Yeah.
So and I'll be able to use it for other shawls in the future as well. So.
Right. And then your daughter was the chief tester, I guess, of the.
She is. She loves the shawl. So she's tested its bounciness. She likes to put it over her head, and then bounce up and down because this yarn is very bouncy, which is very it's fun to watch her do that. But it's also very cuddly. So that bounce stuff too actually really wraps around you and lets you cuddle. And she's a cuddle buddy. And that's what I always say. And so she's constantly grabbing it and throwing it around her and watching TV. So I think she's ready for me to make her own one, or otherwise we're going to be fighting over this one all the time.
Oh, that's so great. Let me see what else I wanted to ask you about that. I guess the other question I had for you was, I do have people that are knitters that are typically used to knitting commercial yarn that goes with the pattern, whatever the pattern says to use, right? And so adapting hand spun to a pattern, can you talk about that? Because I know I get a lot of people that are concerned about that and want to know how to deal with it.
Yeah, for me, I always swatch. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I hate to swatch. But it's really important, especially for me, even when I'm doing commercial yarns, because for the way I knit, I typically have to go down 1 to 2 needle sizes in order to get gauge. Okay. So it's just the way I knit. I'm never, even if I use the yarn that's recommended in the pattern, I'm not going to get the gauge that they recommend with the same needle size. So, but for the hand spun, I typically, this time around, I knitted a much larger swatch to make sure that I was going to be at gauge. And that's just because with the hand knitting yarns, you have some of the strands that are a little bit thicker and a little bit thinner, which is what I love about it because it gives it character. But I wasn't sure how that would translate gauge wise. And so I knitted a little bit larger swatch, and then I wet blocked it and then let it dry so I can then measure it and see what the final measurement was. Now, with a particular shawl, most shawls, gauge isn't quite so important because if it's a little bit bigger, it's just more to cover you. But for any other type of, like the hat that I knitted before, you want that to be a certain size. And so that was more important to make sure that I did that swatching and see how the yarn was going to behave.
Okay. All right, good. Well, that's, yeah, I hate swatching and I don't block when I do it. So, so that's really great discipline that you show there. So I guess, I want to just thank you so much for, for agreeing to talk to me today about your project. And I guess the last thing I want to know is, so how did it feel when you finished it? What were you, where was your head at when that, came off the needles? And
oh, so I was pleasantly bliss. I constantly, even when I received the yarn, I was like hugging it when I got it. But imagine that you're putting it around you and just that feeling of that accomplishment, like, oh, I finally saw it to the end, and I've been dreaming of this for so long, and now I have it, and it's beautiful, and I love wearing it, and so it is probably one of my favorite things that I've made thus far.
Really?
Oh, yeah, wow. It is. So I'm quite pleased with it. So
that's awesome. Well, when you go to the Shetland Islands, you'll have to bring it with you, and
I shall.
That would be great.
I actually want to learn. I want to learn a lot more about the Shetland sheep and the wool. I'm just fascinated by it because I really haven't felt a wool or a yarn similar to this at all. So it's it to me is unique with character, and I really enjoy that.
That's awesome. So yeah, so now your next step in your transition or in your process here for the fiber journey is you're going to pick up spinning.
I'm going to try. I have the spinning wheel and I have the fleece.
Awesome.
So I did get another fleece from the Mirror Reed. So I'm going to attempt myself, and hopefully, if it turns out, I'm working on a African where I'm doing blocks from the rare sheep breeds in the Shave Them to Save Them program. And so I'm hoping that the Shetland one that I have in there will be something that I've spun. So that will make it very special. If it all works out, then I plan on using it as the border as well, besides the block. So pretty excited.
Yeah, very exciting.
Big opportunity. But I love projects and I love to learn new things. So
great. Well, you know what? We're going to check in after a little while and see how you're doing there, and we'll, because that quilt or the Afghan or whatever, it sounds beautiful. So we'll check in later on.
Okay.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm going to show you how I measure out how much yardage I have in a skein. And the logic behind the way I do it is I count each strand, and each round I know is a certain amount of yardage. And then I have a spreadsheet where I type in the amount of rounds I counted. and then I'll know what my yardage is. So that's the way I mark the yarn for how many yards I've got. I used this little toolkit, and I'm trying to remember, this might have been like a gift, Christmas gift one year where someone gave me a tea assortment or something, and I just thought it was really nifty, so I kept it. So in here are little bits and scraps of paper. Anytime I generate a scrap of paper, I throw it in here, and of course I use the backs. I'm very, very thrifty and anti-waste, really. So those are my paper scraps. Then I have a 3-hole punch because I will mark each of the skeins, because normally I'll do this counting and then I will create the labels a week later, and I might forget at that point. And then I have these twist ties that Rich brought home from work one time. I forget why they had them, but he brought like 3 boxes, so I have like 4 lifetime supply of twist ties. And of course I won't throw them away, so I reuse them. Sickness. My scissors, and then a nice assortment of pens to do the marking. So it really is as simple and tedious as counting out, and I usually go by 2s, and I do it in groups of 25. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 25. And take the twist tie and mark it. And then I'll do that for the whole strand, and then the remainder that does not equate to 25, I'll note that on the little piece of paper, so that way I'll know how many 25s and then how many remainders I have. And that's how I do it. And I'm struck by a story. One time I have a yarn customer. She buys quite a bit of yarn from me. She's a very prolific and talented knitter, and she wanted to buy yarn for a particular project, and normally we only would see each other during Fiber Festival season, which isn't happening this year, but that would be when she would sort of stock up on my stuff. But anyway, she came out to the farm, and it was great. It was really fun. And so I thought it was just a farm visit, but she was like, "Sir, you have any yarn down in the basement that I can look at?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." None of it was marked, So she kind of went through and picked out like 4 skeins, and I'm like, "Well, we're gonna have to mark them." So we actually sat at the dining room table, and she did. She counted out and helped me mark them all, and we kind of got it tabulated and stuff, so she knew how much yardage she was getting and everything. So I don't know. I just thought that it was really funny, because I was kind of embarrassed by how tedious my process is. I'm sure that there's counters and technology to do it, but it's another opportunity for me to once again have the opportunity to feel, touch, kind of as I count. What I can see is how consistent my spinning is, because I'm looking at literally individual strands, and actually I did pretty well on this one. So this is Edith. I keep on to call it Eleanor. This is Edith's yarn skein that I've counted off. Wanted to show you that this is what it looks like. So this is, if I see a skein like this in my workroom, I know that, I've got to get that counted and marked. So this has got 25 increments, and then I put the one that's like left that doesn't make 25, that's the remainder, and I'll put the name of the which I even wrote Eleanor there. That's wrong, it's Edith. And that there were 20 strands that were left as a remainder. So that's at that point. Now I'll take you over to the computer and show you how I do the math. Alright, so I'm sitting here at my laptop, and I unwound the twist ties. So I have 7 twist ties total from the skein, not including the remainder one of 20. And then on my laptop, what I do here is I know that I have, each round is 57 inches. So I type in 7 there because I had 7 25s, and then I had 20 singles. And then what this created for me is the ability to do the calculation so I don't have to. So it's gonna, on the label I'm gonna mark it as 308 yards and it's going to be $58 because this is a solid yarn, and my solid yarns right now are at 19 cents a skein. So on my tag here, let me just change the name. And this is just my working tag until I actually create my real label. So this is Edith, and I weighed it on the scale, and it weighed 2.94 ounces, I believe. So I just round it down so that you always are getting more than what I have on the label. It's 2.9 ounces. 308 yards, and that's $58. So then I take all that information and I put it onto the actual label that goes on, you know, so that when you purchase it, that's all the data here is what goes onto that. Okay, so this skein is from Sigrun. So she was born in 2019. So this was her first fleece, and I remember I rued her, and her fiber was really short, so I decided to spin her. So what I provide when you look at my labels, and you know, I probably should work on this because I have people come in the booth and they'll show me my label and ask me how much it is, and the price is down there, but it's like one of 12 other pieces of data that I supply because I'm interested in a lot of the other elements of the wool. So at any rate, so it gives you the name Sigrun. I put the breed on here because I'm thinking about, you know, you take it home and you've bought all sorts of yarn from all sorts of places, and maybe you know, this will help you to remember. Although it does say Whispering Pines registered Shetland sheep down here, but I don't know, maybe it helps you to think it through. And then I put that it's a U. It's not really that important. The only reason I put that on there is if it's hand spun, that means I washed it and processed it myself. And if you get the slightest, like this is Ram, this is from Rush, his white parts of his body. And if you get the slightest little scent of boy, I want to make sure you know that that's what it is, so that maybe before you purchase it, you can give it your test, because some people can really smell it and it's unbearable for some people. Alright, so I put the sex on. Then I say what the year of the fleece was. So yeah, so this fleece was, acquired from us in 2020, so this was from a 2020 clip. And I will have yarns. This one is from 2019. This is from Nita. This is one of those gradient yarns. And this yarn is 2018. So this was one I actually did for a woman who needed like 1,000 yards of brown or something, and so this was extra. Then I put the micron data, and we're going to spend more time with Rich here in the next few weeks. He's volunteered. He said he would do another interview with a couple other pieces of data. The color. Now, this is something that's interesting too, because there's people that will pick up my black yarns and say, this looks very dark brown to me. And I say, well, if that's what it looks like to you, that's great. Everybody, you know, it's interesting to me that people see different colors when they look at my yarn. But she's registered black. Her genetics are black, so she's black for all intents and purposes. I put the date of birth. Now that's important, because if it's an older you, it might explain why you are feeling maybe a little less elegant handle. I'm not going to say coarse, because even my old Jews, they're not coarse, but they will have, an, you know, just like with us, when our, you know, our hair gets a little less silky and stuff. So I hate that, because they're so wonderful and they don't deserve to be criticized for that. So I mean, there's a purpose for all the yarns. So what you want to do when you look at my labels is you want to compare their date of birth with the year of the fleece, because like I said, I will have yarns that I've had on the shelf for a few years. Then in the lengths, now this is interesting too, because my lengths vary one skein to the next. These are hand spun. When I sell the mill spun, those are all consistent. But the hand spun, you know, I spin until I'm done with the yarn, and then I make a skein that looks about right, around 250 yards, but it never is, and I really want to give you what the exact number is. Because it's hand spun, it's a little pricey, so you want to make sure you're getting just as much as you need for your project. So yeah, so that's the length. And then the weight, the 3.6 ounces is what this one weighs. I always round to your favor. I always round down so that you always are, it's always going to say less than what you're actually going to get, because I just want to make sure you don't run out, because again, with a lot of these, you know, I only have like 3 or 4 skeins per fleece, and year over year the colors change a little bit, so it's important to make sure that you're going to have enough for whatever you're working on. The other benefit of the ounces that I put on here is I also have some hand knit stuff from my hand spun that's, you know, pretty much the same, and you can sort of feel it. And then I put the weight of what those items are. So if you go on my Etsy shop, or if you stop at my booth, I have hats and mittens and socks. I've got a lace shawl that I made. And I show you, I weigh them, and you can see the scale, how much it weighs, and that gives you a gauge for, oh, if I wanted to make a hat, that's how much, you know, your weight I would need. Then the type, whether it's a solid yarn, a gradient, or I think I have a self-striping. There's a self-striping yarn, which I'm going to do an episode on how I make that, because that's super cool. Then that's just, again, you know, if you've saved the label, and you want to just make sure that you know what you have. Then what the price is. And then I have the link to our blog. I have my email and my phone number. This is the logo for the Fine Fleece Shetland Sheep Association, which we're members. We're actually charter members of that. And then, best of all, a picture of the lovely ewe that gave us the wool. So, yeah, I put a lot of information on there. I think it's important. It would be important to me if I were spending this kind of money on yarn and was going to be making something. I would hope that's going to be, you know, heirloom quality. So that's pretty much my process. Again, that's just for hand spun. Mill spun is totally different and actually quite new for me. So let's show you some of my. This is how I store them. I don't twist them up or anything. They sort of just hang in there loose in the bag, safe from all the moths and everything. And it's just like a, as one of my clients that made a Hap shawl says, it's like a big hug. It does feel like that. This is the second load, and we're about half done. We're up. Once we get this done, we're gonna have 400 bales. We need about 600, according to Rich. So that's all the new hay right there. It's so pretty. It really smells awesome. Normally I'm not the person that stacks the hay in the barn, but there was a series of events that resulted in me having to do it. Number one was that the guy that delivers the hay wasn't able to pinpoint when he was going to deliver, and it turned out that Andrew wasn't home when the hay was delivered. And then rain was in the forecast, so we had to get it in the barn before the rain. Rich had cut his thumb 2 days before and had to get stitches, so he couldn't stack the hay. And Will's always been the outside loader because he's got really bad allergies, and it's just not a good thing for him to have to be in that barn with all the hay and dust and everything. So I was the one doing it, and it was really hard work, and I'm happy that we've only got 200 bales to go.